So I am a naturopath and specialist in women's health, and as we've heard from multiple things, this is a disease that's very complicated. So this is the first image, which I'm sure you can all relate to in some way, shape or form, whether you are laying in fetal position consistently. It is probably the most complicated reproductive disorder that we do see in clinic, and that's purely just because of the symptoms that are involved in the treatment looking for a successful outcome. So as a naturopath, we see all sorts of diseases, but this being a complicated disease, there's so many systems involved. I think you said that, Grant. It's not a hormonal condition, it's actually an inflammatory condition. I think you said it as well, Esme. It's driven via hormones, so quite often we look at estrogen dominance as the cause, and we're not sort of treating it as multiple pillars and multiple aspects involved. If I can use myself as an example, I was an 18-year-old naturopathic student, and I was that one sitting in the car taking Nurofen in between lectures to try and be able to cope. And unfortunately, I was using natural medicine at this age, so I wasn't really a very good example, but I wasn't getting anywhere and I didn't really understand why. And it wasn't until later stages when I was in clinic that it came to my attention that I really wasn't treating it holistically, and I was really only treating the hormones involved, and so that's where I was going wrong. Some of you actually may be already taking natural medicine and still every month sitting there going through the process of and the symptoms that you're sort of having to deal with because you're not really treating it as a whole picture and just maybe through the hormones itself. I was talking to Grant earlier. It's not an autoimmune disease in itself, but it does mimic a little bit of autoimmune, and it actually also mimics cancer. So it's not cancer, but it does also mimic it, but it also is an inflammatory disease, and it's also driven a lot by stress, and there's an understanding where stress comes into this factor from a naturopathic perspective. The estrogen markers that we look at, which we test a lot in clinic, come from the 3 different types of estrogen, and quite commonly your GP will only look at the E2, and that is definitely a part of it, but we like to look at the whole picture. So your E1, your E2 and your E3. These estrogens, the E1 and the E2, they're on the left, they really should only be making up about 10% of our total estrogens, and our E3 is the one that really we want to be around 80%. I actually have a little example here. So this is a salivary hormone profile test that we would normally look for. This is quite a comprehensive one, and this isn't necessarily for an endo patient, but this is just an example that I had. So you can see when we send away for these things, we're looking at the 3 different types of estrogens. We get a ratio breakdown as well. Quite often, or this is called more so functional medicine. So not a lot of GPs do it, but we do work in with a couple of local GPs who are quite open to this as well. So it's $20 a hormone to test, and I think it's definitely worth testing. Some of you may have already had this done if you're seeing a naturopath as well. Definitely essential, because if you're looking at an estrogen pattern where you're looking at that as a key driver, you really do need to know where your different types of estrogen sit. Otherwise, you're sort of just taking a stab in the dark, really, and you don't truly know what you're treating. So these are my 6 key elements that I'm looking at in clinic. Quite often we get patients turn up that say, oh, I've been trying fish oil, or I've been doing magnesium, I've been doing this, that, and it's really not working at all. So generally the problem there is they're not treating all 6. And this is my 6, and this is what I think are the major components involved. And this is, keep in mind, from a naturopathic perspective, because when you're talking to researchers, they come from a different perspective as well. My first protocol is always the gut, and looking at the gut microbiome. It is essentially a collection of bacteria that resides in our digestive tract, and it's quite often disrupted through an endo patient. It makes up for about 60 to 80% of our total immune system, and the immune system is a huge part in treating endometriosis. So it is our second brain, and that's purely because of the connection we have between our mood and our hormones. So it does it does a lot of vital functions, but these are just a few. So it manufactures serotonin, metabolizes our estrogen, which is why exercise is quite important, because it keeps our gut and our liver moving, and therefore we're able to metabolize that estrogen and excrete it via urine and feces. It extracts calories from food, and this is one that always attracts people's attention, because in a patient that is trying to lose weight that might present with maybe PCOS and endo, the gut microbiome is quite important because it does actually extract calories from our food. So if there's not one thing that most females take from that, it's that extract calories from food. It also does our nutrient absorption through our small intestine. This is just a little example I wanted to give purely because the very top of these examples is the gut and the gut microbiome in itself. And you can see, sorry, I don't normally use this, but I need to here. You can see as we get this downward effect what it actually does to a liver. So on the left is a healthy one. And we can see that the liver over here is working effectively. We're getting this elimination via urine and feces, and we're all happy and everyone's healthy. You can see we've got a healthy immune system down here and not much inflammation. I very rarely see an endo patient with this on the left. It's quite often the one on the right, because they've got these inflammatory markers and they've got this gut microbiome that's quite stressed, because every 21 to 28 days they're stressed. Their body's under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, and unfortunately that does impact the rest of the system. So we've got a liver that's sort of acting out and having difficulties in clearance, and it's got a lot of pressure and a lot of toxic load going on. We've then got this immune activation and a high inflammatory response. So these are our main systems that we're looking at, and it does start from the very top with a healthy gut microbiome. I'm sure most of you have seen ethical nutrients ads for many years about the little men that run around. It's not as easy as that, but that's a great start. Estrogen metabolism, like I was suggesting, does need proper liver detoxification, which if you've got a gut that's inflamed or irritated, it does put pressure onto the liver, and therefore the liver can't function. So it's a little bit like a pool filter or a vacuum cleaner. It needs to be cleaned, it needs to be supported. It's not broken as such, but it just doesn't work as effectively. The brassica family of vegetables do help estrogen metabolism via the liver, so your broccoli and your Brussels sprouts and all those wonderful things, but you would have to eat a truckload of them to have that effect. So we use a product called diindolylmethane, which is DIM, and some of you may have heard of that. Indolplex is a great one that we use, and a lot of naturopaths do use, and it just helps that estrogen clearance by what we call conjugating or binding and helping that elimination of estrogen. Remembering that estrogen is the driver behind, so we do have to make sure we've got that clearance constantly, otherwise you get a whole number of other effects going on. The other thing, before I go on to that, is quite often you'll hear everyone say it's an estrogen dominance disease, or an estrogen dominance condition, and it is, but it's also an estrogen displacement, and it's just the fact that we don't have the right amounts of estrogens, where we go back to that 10 and 80%, we don't have them in the correct percentages. So these are my sort of top ones for a healthy gut microbiome and healthy liver. A good high quality multi-strain probiotic. There is different probiotics for different conditions, and in this case I would go multi-strain unless I was treating something specific like an IBS or something like that. Liver herbs help that liver clearance and detoxification. Slippery elm, glutamine and aloe vera help lower inflammation through the gut. So it just helps keep that healthy gut microbiome, which is your first port of call. Some of you may already do lemon in water, apple cider vinegar in the morning to help stimulate digestion and get everything moving. And dietary-wise, soluble fibre, oats, lentils and legumes, it actually feeds our good bacteria, so it keeps our good bacteria living and healthier for a longer period of time. Our microbiome changes every day by what we do. This is a touchy one for some people, but I like to limit, if not eliminate, gluten, dairy and red meat from my patients who actually have chronic disease and autoimmune. So purely just because it does drive inflammation, and it doesn't have to be forever, but it can just be to sort of down-regulate those inflammatory markers and get people back to feeling well again. This is one that everyone can do, whether you've got endometriosis or not, they can all relate to this, is that if your adrenal glands, if you are feeling tired, stressed, craving sugar, waking fatigue, some of you might sleep 10 hours and still wake and hit the alarm clock 3 or 4 times. This is actually your adrenals, which aren't doing very well. And some of the symptoms may be that 2 to 4 p.m. fatigue, the anxiety, sleep issues, where between 2 and 4 in the morning you actually wake and you might be a light sleeper, hair loss and poor tolerance. So some people explain it the sound of somebody eating just absolutely drives them mental, or being on the road, some people laughed, or being on the road and driving and a bit of road rage. So the adrenals come into play and they disrupt the gut. So your stress constantly has an impact on your gut health, and this is why it's important for these adrenal glands to be supported. Also find what your stressors are. So busy lifestyle, sugar, caffeine. Most adrenal patients will live on caffeine. They will use caffeine as their support, or they'll use sugar as their support. And unfortunately, you're then stuck on this wheel and this perpetual cycle where it's going round and round and round because you're driving one thing, your cortisol's upsetting your gut and your gut's disrupting your liver, and then you've got these inflammatory markers. Back on what Esme was saying, over-exercising, it's not a one-size-fits-all, unfortunately, and sometimes doing something like restorative yoga is better than going for a 10-kilometre run, and a lot of people actually miss that because weight tends to be on the picture for a lot of patients with PCOS or endo, and so they're so desperate to lose weight that they'll just go and run 10 kilometres or run a marathon thinking it's doing them benefits, and it's doing the opposite. Your immune system really truly is your only defence against endometriosis, or one of your main defence. So it's most important to make sure you've got this healthy gut microbiome, because that is where your immune system truly is stored in a sense. And without this endometrial tissue has the ability to continue growing. And the key that the one major thing that I try to stress to all my clients is, if your adrenal glands are too busy pumping cortisol and they're go, 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 go all the time, they don't have the ability to go and support your immune system to fight this disease, to fight this inflammation. So they're too busy over here trying to do this fight or flight response and protect you from whatever it is we're meant to protect against when we're in danger, and we're not over here fighting against this disease. So it's really important that your immune system is supported. These are my top nutrients, and I've been very basic but very specific. So fish oil, not fish capsules. Fish oil capsules, they're a no-go for me. And that's purely because of the amount that's required to take, and compliance is quite poor with most patients. Endoplex is a must in my clinic, and I can honestly say I use it with 99% of my endo patients. High quality probiotic for that gut microbiome, and magnesium powder just to act as a vasodilator and pain management for a lot of women. My number one herb to use across the board is turmeric, and a lot of people will suggest or say that they're taking turmeric or using turmeric in their food, and unfortunately, again, you would need to eat a lot of turmeric, but it's about 1 ml of my liquid that I would use, which would be equivalent to about half a kilo of turmeric in a powder, if that's, yeah. So a lot, you'd be yellow. And it can't just be plain turmeric, it has to be active curcumin. So in tablets these days, if you read a label, it'll say whether it will generally be curcumin, but it has to be its active form. Vitex, there's a lot of products out there, like your fusion tablets, they will generally have Vitex. And look, these are never going to be your answer on their own, so you really truly do need to use it as a whole, but these are the herbs that I would normally use and suggest for a basic concept. Thank you everybody for listening, and I hope that it's quite general. Well, it's not general, but I've touched on a few systems that are involved in the endometriosis picture, and it is quite complicated, but if you can take something from today, it's the fact that this disease is an inflammatory disease, and it does require a lot of support from multiple systems. So it's not just a matter of taking one product or doing this, so don't lose hope in natural medicine. Thank you.